Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Sunday at 10 a.m. I think that's quite a feat considering what happened last night and all the great parties that happened. Welcome to Art Basel in Hong Kong 2015's Conversations. I'd like to introduce our two wonderful speakers who I think don't really need any introduction at all. We have with us internationally acclaimed artist Cao Fei. Just a very quick reminder as well that Cao Fei's work is also seen on the ICC building, for those of you who have not looked at the building at night. She's worked, this year Cao Fei was our artist for the commission that we worked with the ICC building. It's called Same Old Brand New. And I'd like to introduce the great Hans Ulrich Obrist, co-director of Serpentine Gallery, who actually really doesn't need any introduction at all. I think I won't, I'll leave the stage to the both of them. And welcome to the Premier Artist Talk. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for the introductions, and many thanks to Mark and everybody at Art Basel, Hong Kong, and of course also to Jessica for all the organization. It is indeed a great pleasure and privilege to have this conversation today with Cao Fei. We've been having this infinite conversation, I would say, for more than 10 years now, but today there is many new things to discuss, particularly, of course, the new commission which happened here, which many of you saw, but also many of the more recent films of Cao Fei. So we will have this conversation. In the middle of it, there will be short interjections actually of films, so that you will also see some extracts of the different pieces. But before we do that, as Kevin McGarry always says, it's kind of great to begin with when an artist had the very first idea of how it actually all began, to begin with the beginning, to quote Bastian Ader. And actually, I wanted to ask you how it all started, because it came to mind yesterday, because your father was here yesterday, the very well-known sculptor, and obviously both your parents actually were in the arts. So I was kind of wondering how it all began and how art came to you and how you came to art, and the role Hong Kong played in all of that. Because it is interesting, I always remember when I came to see you for the first time, it was just a few weeks after Han Ru had met you and you were still a student. And Han Ru came back from a trip to Guangzhou where he had visited his parents and had told me that he met an extraordinary young artist and that I would have to meet you. So we had our first meeting, and I remember in that very first meeting, you told us about the context, of course, of your parents being both artists, but actually many of your inspirations came from Hong Kong.
I'm
going to speak Mandarin, so you have to listen to simultaneous interpreting. I was born in South China, in Guangzhou, Canton, which is very close to Hong Kong. So ever since I was a child, I have come under the influence of the culture in Hong Kong ever since the opening up and reforms policy by Deng Xiaoping. Lots and lots of popular culture, especially Hong Kong popular culture, actually was transmitted to China and exerted a very considerable impact on me. Since 1990s, mainland Chinese people were allowed to travel to Hong Kong. It's not like it's not as convenient as it today. So for me, there are lots of opportunities to come to Hong Kong and travel. Here, my father, since the late 1980s, were invited and or commissioned to create a sculpture. So from my father's side, also got a lot of opportunities to travel to Hong Kong. So I've been to, my first work was exhibited there. It was a short film. I was still a university student. I didn't know that I would like to become an artist. So I entered into a kind of a competition for short films, and I was shortlisted. It was called 2 257. And when Ho Hanru, the curator, came back to Guangzhou and he saw the film, and he brought this particular film to, kind of incorporated into contemporary art shows. Ever since then, I kind of entered the realm of contemporary art. So I kind of took departure from Hong Kong, my artistic career.
It's interesting, you also mentioned that at that time it wasn't possible to get MTV in China, but whenever you visited your parents' friend in Hong Kong, you had access to MTV. There were, of course, also the Japanese cartoons. There was Tintin, there was Astro Boy. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about these kind of early influences.
Because I have two older sisters. When I was a child, they were going through adolescence, and they were listening to popular music from Hong Kong. And back then it was like the videotapes, VHS videotapes, not DVD. So they were able to copy and transmit all these entertainment. So we can see very vague like MTV recordings, Michael Jackson songs, Madonna, Sting, all these singers. So those artists that were these videotapes from the 1980s. So in my video work, there will be a lot of, actually the voice played a very important role, and also motion pictures, and also the rhythm of cutting. I think that all this has borne the imprint of my cultural memories of the youth. And also TVB and all these channels in Hong Kong, we were able to connect our TV with a special antenna, so we can actually receive signals for these Hong Kong TV stations. So all the pop culture, such as all these galas and political satire, and also soap, TV soap, and all these comic films were pretty much important influences on my early work.
Maybe two more questions about early influences from Japan. I also remember that in our first conversation you mentioned Yoko Ono. And Yoko Ono, of course, has inspired so many artists. Dominique Gonzalez-Förster told me the other day that also for her it was an amazing trigger. She saw a postcard of Yoko Ono, and that was essential for her in her kind of becoming an artist. And you often talked about Yoko's inspiration, the courage she transmitted to her, but then you talked also about the influence of Terayama Tsuji. So I was just wondering if you could talk about these two influences.
So Japanese culture, and as well as Hong Kong culture, Asian culture in general, they were very, very close. So therefore, it's easy for them to impact. So Yoko Ono, of course, I actually got to know about him after I entered college. So it's all from these historical documentaries and textbooks about contemporary art. And I encountered the Yoko Ono in person was in 2007 in Serpentine Gallery in London. I met her in person. And as a lady from East Asia, as a female artist, it is extremely tough to be a contemporary artist, and also questioning, interrogating contemporary globalization is also, it takes also a lot of guts. So she exerted another person that exerted on me is a playwright and also a director, Yamaguchi. When I was a student, I ran into some of his video works. He died in the 80s, but a lot of his dramatic practice, especially in the 60s, in the contemporary political layout of 1960s, his work, his video work, this sort of struggle towards a new freedom. He did actually quite a lot of experimental work in terms of video work.
And now today we will talk about one aspect particularly important in your practice, which is the city. Obviously, when I came first to China in the mid-90s, we did research for Cities on the Move and did this exhibition which started, which I co-curated with Hans Ulrich for the Vienna Secession, which then traveled through 8 different countries over several years. And this exhibition had all to do with the idea of the mutation of the city. It had the idea with how artists were affected really by this incredible mutation of cities in the 90s. For you, it's not only an influence you have from the city, but at a certain moment, actually this desire to build your own city, to invent your own city. And that leads us right away to RMB City. It's a project which evolved over several years. We showed it for an entire year at the Serpentine Gallery. It started with you investigating Second Life. Can you tell us maybe what was the epiphany of RMB City? Sometimes it's interesting when an idea is born. And when one talks to a scientist, often, the scientist can tell us precisely on which day, when we did for Art Basel a couple of years ago, before he died, the interview with the very old Albert Hoffmann, who discovered LSD. He told us the story precisely the day he had discovered LSD. When we did the conversation with Benoit Mandelbrot, he remembered the rainy Wednesday when he all of a sudden saw fractals. So I wanted to ask you if you remember the day you invented RMB City.
If I really have to, if we talk about inventing the city, I would have to say it was my first encounter with the internet, with virtual reality, with video games. That was towards the end of 2006. So one of my best friends, actually also a voice artist, Zhang Anding, he kind of initiated me into video games. He said it's representing the, buying land and building a city. So China Tracy was the username I registered with my account. So I basically registered an account online, started to feel into the city, and then I discovered back then the virtual community was very, very popular back then. That was the period when it was most popular, and right now it's kind of reached a certain bottleneck. Back in the old days, a lot of internet companies were participating in the development of virtual communities. So they were building like IBM, lots of universities. They were discussing educational models or commercial models, all sorts of interactive models about virtual community. When I was initiated into it, I was basically just trying to discover the ecology of virtual communities. And as an artist, what interests me was how to build sort of your own land, your homeland, so to speak, for yourself. So I did some research for some time, and I used my image as a Chinese girl as an avatar, and I bought new skin and wore very Japanese robotic outfit. So sometimes I would change my outfit and just try to look a bit girly, or sort of school uniform that is very Japanese, or these Changsan in the Chinese culture. So I would go to many places within the virtual space of Second Life, for example, to IBM. Also, would just fly around, go to the headquarters, also take the space trains, and also gay clubs, to sort of people who are into like animal fetish, that kind of fur lovers, that kind of clubs with that kind of avatar. So go figure. And for half a year, I basically tried to sort of do a thorough research of the ecology of a Second Life. But in the meantime, I was embroidered in a sort of I met a male avatar, and we had a romantic relationship online, although nothing actually happened. But I did I did a work called I Mirror, which is before RMB City. I thought it was as a documentary. It was as kind of my exploration of virtual community in Second Life, how I interrogate virtual reality, virtual life. So with such a story, I felt that I should create within this virtual platform something that belonged to me, sort of an island that is mine and mine alone.
Now, also, one of the things which struck me with RMB City is the notion of collaboration, because it obviously is not a city, one doesn't build a city on one's own, it's a collaborative effort, and in this case it actually involved collectors, it involved galleries, it involved scholars, researchers, artists, schools, exhibition projects. I mean, I remember when we worked for this one-year project at the Serpentine, that you involved lots of different kind of layers, you know, not only institutions, but also educational facilities and public organizations. And you sort of said the collaborators were collectors, where actually collectors became actively participating in the actual development. I remember there was a very close dialogue you had with Uli Sick, for example, who from the very beginning was involved with helping you to build the city. There was the public organizations as a second layer, which is obviously the work with museum and art organization. Then the idea of exhibitions, that actually RMB City would make appearances in biennales and triennials. Yokohama, 2008, I think was an early one, New Orleans. And then of course also this whole category of other collaborators, where you invite actually parties and participants not only from the art world, but from the other worlds, from other parallel realities, to cooperate. So it would be great to hear a little bit more from you about this incredible web of collaboration, or as Isabel Stenger said, that actually the work creates new alliances in some way.
So I would like to have to build a city in the name of the artist. So after a thorough research of Second Life, including all sorts of possibilities, explorations in that, and I wanted to actually build, I envisage RMB City as capable of incorporating the artistic, entire ecology of artistic creation, like can sort of incorporate within the city lots of different explorations in virtual artistic reality. So it was an ambitious project for me, and I tried to get different kinds of people involved. So during the process of building up the city, including buying such a piece of land in Second Land, I have to really buy a lot of things. So you have to pay virtual currency. So that the entire city, where this funds come from. So we would like to ask artistic institutions, and but they will not get instant reward. So Uli Sieg, he was the first person to be the patron of my project. So we gave the city hall to Uli. So in reality, we kind of name a building Li Gaxing building, Li Gaxing Tower or something. So it's kind of like we name the city hall within RMB City to Mr. Sieg. So he was granted the right to use it. And with this project, we can also we get operational costs, because this project was envisioned as a 2-year project, but it was kind of delayed because building the city itself took a lot of time. And afterwards, you have the Yulan's Art Center in Beijing. They also participated in collecting one of the virtual buildings. They didn't have any rewards. A lot of the time, they just occupied a particular virtual space, a digital space, and they can do whatever exhibitions they want to within the buildings they have got in the RMB City, and also different biennales, different artistic institutions, all sorts of virtual activities we have organized. One was called the Naked Body Project. As avatars, you have to wear clothes. While in a virtual society, we still have such doubt about our body. Why do we? In our attempt to try and to represent our true self, so we basically. We kind of just borrow the term American Idol, the format, and we just did a naked idol. So we had a panel of judges. We have different avatars who go naked, and they can just show off their own bare skin and to represent their naked body. So, for example, there's like the Matrix, for example, people figures in there. There are animals, they are invisible, or they're just completely colded. The entire body is colded, or a naked beauties. We would ask these avatars, how do you think? What does naked body mean to you? So in this way, I also borrowed a lot of references, appropriated a lot of popular culture as part of my urban practice, and also work with bio artists and architects. So if you see like you have a Guggenheim that is floating in the air, and we have a project we have an exhibition in Guggenheim, so we try to build a virtual Guggenheim within the RMB City, and also the designer who designed the guy who collaborated with Remco Quest in the design of CCTV tower. So we kind of digitized a lot of models of his real life projects, and we also did kind of interdisciplinary collaboration.
You refer here to Ole Sharon, the German architect, who obviously we're going to talk about later because he also plays a role for Last City, where basically he gave you the model you used for the film. But before we go there, maybe a last question about this utopia here, because obviously there is a long history of artists and architects imagining their own city. Some started to build it, like Paolo Soleri, the Italian architect who died recently with Arco Santi. Others like Jonas Friedman or even Constant with New Babylon remained imaginary cities. So I was wondering how this project connect to this sort of whole history of utopia and artists' utopia, and how you would define this idea of utopia. I mean, it's interesting, Ernst Bloch, when pushed against the wall by Adorno to finally define what is utopia, defined it as something is missing. So I was kind of curious, what would be your definition of utopia, and if it's an utopic project for you.
Well, I first ran into the issue of utopia towards the year 2005, when I started to work on the Siemens factory in Dongguan. So it developed into a project called Who's Utopia. So basically, I did half-a-year research in the Siemens factories around the Pearl River Delta, and I did a lot of interviews with factory floor workers, and then I did an audiovisual work called Who's Utopia. So back then, I would like to raise questions about the utopia, to interrogate the concept of utopia, and under the rapid development of Chinese economy, it's kind of a question: whose utopia is it? Does it come from the workers, or does it come from the city, or does it come from capital? So when we were doing People's Fortress, the project, and so we tried to use artistic concepts to look yet again for a kind of the outlet for utopia in our reality. So with this ambition, we started to build this city, and it's an answer that we've been searching for. So when I was working on the project Who's Utopia, I also realized that utopia actually lies underneath your feet. It's in contemporary. It's a work in progress. It's always going on. So in the People's Fortress project, I was working with the hope that utopia can be contained in an online community, and you can reconfigure a future utopia. But in 2008, when the world was hit with the financial crisis, this project was also negatively impacted because there were a lot of financial support, like from institutions and collectors, and also these Second Life, the company itself, could not really break from the bottleneck of commercial operation. So this entire project did not really develop to a level of utopia. Like, it was nowhere as prosperous as we had imagined. Although this project is over, but this is probably exactly a response to the concept of utopia.
Our last question about RMB, because it's basically a laboratory for both, digital art, for filmmaking, but it's also, as you once said, a laboratory for live theater. And this whole idea of how actually the life enters is something I'm very interested in. It was on January the 1st, 2000, that I had a phone conversation with Matthew Barney, who, like you, had for years and years, explored moving image and film and had done this Cremaster cycle. And he felt on January the 1st, 2000, that there was a real urge, a real desire for live experience. And that's obviously something which we've seen ever since very strongly in art. Artists working more with life. And I was kind of wondering how you connect projects like this to life and to also, for example, your theater piece you did, I think, in Italy.
So when I was in Canton, in Guangzhou, your life, your circumstance, you're very deeply rooted in your life circumstances. We know that in Canton, Hong Kong, it's a very rich, it's always 24/7. It never sleeps, and the urban ecology is always on the move. So as an artist, as anybody, so if you live in, you always feel satisfied, you always feel gratified, and you always feel energized in the city. But I can extend it to the second work I'm going to talk about. When I moved to Beijing later, it was a completely different lifestyle. Completely, as a southerner going to the north, it takes a lot of readjustment, and you have to resist this really bad weather in the north and very, very boring lifestyle in the north. So this RMB City, a lot of time was basically, largely was completed when I was living in Beijing. So this prosperity, the online prosperity formed a kind of a stark contrast with the kind of boring, monotonous reality of my offline work. So we can probably we can watch the video, a strip of RMB City. Can we actually just watch maybe 2 minutes? So a short film basically was about 5 minutes. So we just give you a taste.
Okay. How you kind of see this work in 10, 20 or 30 years, because it's obviously not a given that Second Life, will exist. At the same time, you do have this archive. How will the work survive, and how does it have to be protected? Because in a way, it's different from an object. It kind of needs another form of protection, I suppose. And how do you expect future generations to see RMB City?
说到刚才那个对我这个项目很重要的。
So one thing that exerted a very important influence on me was Italo Calvino, an Italian writer. The Invisible City was a very great source of inspiration. Although my project has been completed, I still have a backup. I basically kind of just compressed. And so once you just right-click the thing and then it will release. It's not online anymore, but we've done a lot of backup work. So the city is basically openable in many ways. It's collapsible. So it's kind of halfway between representation and invisibility. So of course, it is different from these works made works that are objects. So it's basically kind of captures an imagination of utopia for previous generations. So in the future, it's just a folder, a dodia. So when we look at Google Maps, Apple Maps, and we look at digital maps, they are basically representing, duplicating reality, buildings and blocks and neighborhoods. So in such between virtual geography and real geography, the boundaries are being blurred. So do we really know that if it's real, it's not real-time image, but when we close this, once we close the web page, it ceases to exist. So this imagination of the elsewhere is always virtual, because all the maps are digital, and the 3D visionaries, the visuals we have, is located within sort of an abyss. So when I do RMB City, this kind of psychological and virtual responses to the urban scene. So if we look at social media, online media. So I would like to. We don't particularly need to rely on real life responses. We can do. You can be an internet famous. You can have an internet famous, like all the selfie culture we're going to cover today as well. So in the online city is basically kind of a way of reconstituting life. But of course, 20 years, 30 years from now, if we look at VHS, like videotapes, it's kind of an archaeological records of past records, like discussions of explorations of past possibilities.
Indeed, VHS is almost like an antiquity now. It looks like something from an antique age. But somehow it's interesting, the shift which happens to Haze and Fog, because obviously RMB City connects so much to computer animation, to the cyber world, whilst Haze and Fog actually focuses much more, it's a counterpoint somehow to this utopia. It's somehow darker, and it starts with something which is actually a very Western trope of horror, the zombie, and channels it through all kinds of other contexts, of course, the Chinese context. I was kind of wondering where did this interest in the phenomenon of the zombie in your work come from, and what role it sort of plays out in the film?
In 2011, the northern parts of China, air pollution was really, really in the most serious situation. So back then, I started to watch an American TV series called Walking Dead. So I would always follow very closely this particular TV series. I think it's on AMC channel, but I always watch these Chinese bootlegged versions online. For example, the newest series where it was broadcast yesterday, and then 7 hours later, these volunteer translators would then subtitle, just like what we're doing right now, with the simultaneous interpreting. There's a little bit of time lag, but mostly. So a lot of people, the fans of The Walking Dead series, so as long as we know when the next season is out, we will always get very excited and full of anticipation. So in that particular period, due to the fog, the haze, and also the availability of the TV series, and the entire city of Beijing was shrouded, enveloped in a fog. When you looked out, you couldn't see anything. You saw just the whiteness, shapeless, morphless white. You felt like you were stricken with fear, and you felt like it was ghostly. And of course, under the influence of the apocalyptic nature of Walking Dead, so between 11 to 12, 11 to 25, we call the world is coming to an end. So planetary destruction, fear for this, and also haze and fog. The overlapping impact of these factors. It's kind of an alternative, more extreme response to something that has been touched upon in RMB City. Beijing life is very busy. It's just like in the film, in the TV series Walking Dead, you have pollution, and also the circumstances I've been discussing. So they have transformed emergency into reality. So you have to always read air quality reports before you go out, decide whether you're going to put on facial masks. So all of this has made me more anxious. So when I got a few ideas about the film, I said to myself that I would like to present the concept of zombie, to incorporate into the invisible mist. A lot of films were about mist. Lots of things could happen in there, lots of possibilities, but especially in horror films, for example. So all of this has come into play in my own work. So my work, Haze and Fog, was created against such a backdrop.
Do you want to say something on this extract you chose?
这个影片全长大概有
This film was about 46 minutes long, and there was like a film version of 60 minutes.
在曼彻斯特的华人艺术中
So it was basically collaborated with the Chinese East Side Project, a Chinese artist center in Manchester. So basically, they commissioned these piece of work. I'm very deeply grateful for that, and it has been screened in many places. I haven't seen this trailer for a while, and the space is basically my community where I live. I gave birth to 2 children within a very short span of time, so kind of family life basically kind of put a stop to my creative life. So I have more time to gaze at my own life and my own space and the relationship between me and other people. So within this period of time, I couldn't really work a lot. I could write like fiction, and it has become part of my everyday life. I think that was the easiest, most accessible work for me. And also, my kind of observation of the forms of life around me has, so basically kind of was offering a sort of a script of a framework for my Haze and Fog work.
The connection to cinema. When we showed your work in actually Battersea Power Station in the exhibition Gunnar Quara and Julia Peyton-Johnson and I curated called China Power Station in 2007, we showed you next to Ya Jianke. And seeing the film, I kept thinking of him also. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, if there is a connection.
Battersea 项目是 Power Station 是在
Battersea Power Station was completed in 2006 Chinese art exhibition in London, and I basically did a few performance arts, including inviting a few London-based Chinese art people to use a form of statement and read their own their life, their immigration status in the space of Battersea Power Station. So for a city as large, well, an international city like Beijing, a lot of in mainland Chinese immigrants within domestic immigrants and also social elites share a space. So in this kind of modernized community, you have different layers of inhabitants. You have the middle classes, you have the security guards, you have these labor workers, you have sex workers. So they basically form sort of a small district. You can see so many different layers of social classes and different ways of life, different walks of life. And they basically have constituted our kind of imagination of the modern community. So my fiction and my script was basically based on observation of real life and also imagining sort of what goes on underneath their skin. For example, you see this courier, because right now you have a lot of people shopping online, you buy everything like food, grocery online. So you really don't need a lot of real representation. So you basically want to use the logistic networks. That's how you connect to the real life. So we can feel that real life as we know it in those old days. So Jia Zhangke was mentioned by Hans. I basically watched a lot of independent films, such as early works like Railway Station and also Xiaowu, etc. He gave a very solid observation of the Chinese society in transformation. So basically, that was more of a but behind mine there is more of a theatrical response to it. And so the theatrical tensions and pop culture appropriations, I think for me that's how we should go beyond a realistic framework. So my favorite Swedish director, Roy Andersson, for example, he won the Venice Film Festival Prize last year. So there are different contextual references I could offer you.
There's obviously, again, like in Battersea Power Station, this social dimension that you look very much at the different social layers. At the same time, there are these moments where sort of magic happens. They're like miracles in the film. And I mean, one of the things I kind of was wondering is if you can tell us a little bit about how you work on such a film. Do you write the script first, and or is the script being written whilst you actually work on the film? Because I was always, speaking to my neighbor in London, Nicholas Rourke, the film director, and he said you should start with an A4 sheet of paper, and then really the film was written whilst he shot it. But then, you've obviously got directors who start with a very elaborate script. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this process for such a complex film this is.
I
wrote a lot of short stories. I wrote about nannies. I wrote about middle class family, like housewife, for example, and how I would imagine how her husband would just have an affair, and also the sort of how she sustains the torturous and compromising life of marriage life. So lots of it's also based on my own experience, work, also based upon giving birth. So it's a lot of different relationships that come into play. So how do I work on my film? In the previous creations of mine, I'd like to have divided shoots, because when I was in divided shots, when I was in the university, I did a lot of work, like how to do some stage work, how to. I have a very clear concept of how to produce a film, but towards the end, I'd like to use text to describe a particular shoot. For example, here we don't have divided shots. We just have first shot is basically a first frame is basically a particular scene, and then once you look at the literary text, literary script, it's more of an abstract description as a particular staff. They can hardly imagine what we are getting at in particular act, and only me and the cameraman, when we situate this particular camera in the scene, also I have sort of an image that kind of lingers in my head. There's no dialogue between the figures here. So from an artist like me, maybe dialogue is not really easily expressed in a very natural way. So of course right now you have a lot of contemporary artists that kind of get into film, especially in Hollywood. So from artistic creation to industrialized film industry, there has to be a transformation of worlds, and also it's it's a big trial of sorts.
Now your next film, which I initially misread as LA city, it's actually La town. It's nothing to do with Los Angeles, but it's the French notion of La, comme la ville. So La town is very much, I think, about the disappearance of a city. I mean, we always think like cities are permanent. And as the great Cedric Fries, who inspired us so much about time and the city, always said, we should not forget, cities can also die. Angkor Wat is an example of a city which dies. And obviously, La Town has to do with this idea of a city being struck by an unknown disaster. Can you tell us about how La Town began? And also, I was very curious how Hiroshima Mon Amour, the film actually of Alain Resnais, based on a screenplay of Marguerite Duras, inspired your script for the film, because as you told me earlier today, it was somehow a trigger.
在这个刚才的 Haze and Fog
In Haze and Fog, after the completion of that piece, I thought I still had lots of things to say. So, in a real scene, shooting in a real scene, I've watched Walking Dead, lots of ambitious scenes and big scenes, large scenes, such as the entire blocks have been blighted by zombies, and also the destruction of entire country fields, so like destroyed. So I don't have the platform to represent that, so I'm just trying to complete what I haven't said, just want to express what I haven't fully given expression to. So I was buying maybe milk powder or something online for my child, so I saw this really small fig bird. So it's like small models, like usually used in Germany, like used the train models. It's in that particular culture, like collecting culture. So a lot of young people and even old people, they like to represent the real cars of the 60s and 70s, and they will make like small, like background, like shops, and also fields, to kind of go together with the rail tracks and stuff. Give us kind of a real feeling. So why am I interested in that? Because I mean, I also, as you see in RMB City, this bird's eye view, this vista, this panoptical view, how to control that, or as a director, I said that we also have, we are always given the eye of the God. Always like to see from a sort of give a bird's eye view. So laden, I don't know how to call it, because if we call it the town, it's kind of too simple. I think the French article la is very nice, softer than the. So unconsciously, I just felt it gives me a very good. It gives the project a good name. So if you see that this entire town has been represented gradually, it's a post-apocalyptical city.
Is this the model of Ole Scheren? Because you told me earlier today that actually you found a lot of the ingredients of this city on the internet, you know, the little figures, and then of course lots of the different buildings, but that in the center of it all is this big maquette you found in the archive of Ole Scheren. And I was curious to know more about that and which building of Ole it was.
I don't think this one is. It's basically a car, like a service sales center. If you look at this particular model, it's only as big as my palm. It's the size of my palm. So the entire shooting process is a very microscopic, close range shots. So basically, my studio is 2.2 times 1.2 meters big. I finished the entire project there. So when I was doing laden, it was unscripted. I had a lot of scenes. Basically, I just did it manually. I bought all these models. I asked my assistants to complete the assemblage. So all this destruction, this process, I did it myself with my own hands. So from digital art to traditional like handicraft, I haven't done this for a while. Maybe I did a few handcraft items when I was a student, and also I went online to check how to make models. I bought a lot of tools, instruments, how to create like water, mountains, landscaping stuff. So it's actually very kind of like exercise, yet another exercise of my handcraft. For me, it's like making sculpture, it's making painting to represent. So in Ole Scheren, this architect's, towards the very end, it was pretty unscripted. So after the automotive sales center, then I started to shoot apartment buildings, towers. I had lots of scenes in my head, but after I finish everything, then it probably just all fall into place and make a city. So when I was in university, when I sketch the sculpture of David, my most favorite thing is to start with the eyes. Of course, the faculty, the professor said you first have to draw the facial features first before you have to start with the contour and then move on to the inside. For me, I always start from maybe a small detail, like the eyes, for example. And actually, I fulfilled all the requirements. I didn't actually, it was still a very complete piece of work. So it's just, an artistic way of working with this. So now when I was doing laden, I faced no pressure whatsoever, no exhibiting pressure, whatever. So basically, I had a lot of flexibility and was very relaxing. I didn't have to rush. There was no deadline to meet. So when I was working on it, I felt that everything had to have an ending. So where does this film end? So I thought I needed public space, maybe an art museum. So for a city, regardless of whether it's a ghost town, there has to be a museum, art museum. So there are tons of art museums in China. This archiving of art has to be collected as a town. It has to come with its own art museum. Of course, because I'm quite acquainted with Olli Schirren. I was asking what he could give me to. So his studio basically found me a kind of a piece of architecture that fits my specs. Some of the art museum contests that he entered, design contests he entered in, which was not chosen, and he still had the models there, and it's 1 to 100. So from my own 1 to 87, it fits pretty okay for me. So basically, it's the art museum at night in Laton. That's how the whole thing came into existence. The entire film was shot in the evening, and at night there was no sun because it was post-apocalyptic, so you cannot see the sun anymore. And the art museum at night, it's always open at night when the moon came out, and it collects all the post-apocalyptic emergency life experience from a perspective of an art museum.
And that's obviously part of the myth, which surrounds Laton, this mysterious city struck by disaster, because it's a city where time froze, so there is no more sunlight, and hence, by necessity, as you say, the museum has to be a night museum. I'm obviously most curious to know more about this museum, a museum which is open only after dusk, and as you mentioned, where artifacts about darkness are on display. So, of course, the horror film 30 Days of Night, but you also mentioned installation by Chu Yun, Constellation, and of course also an iPad app game for The Godfather. Can you tell us a little bit about this curatorial vision behind your night museum?
I just wrote a script that even in real life, you probably can make use of an art museum at night, because everybody's working during the day. So I want to have a museum that opens at 8 and closes at 5 a.m. so you can go have a beer there. You can have film screenings there that have to do with the evenings, with darkness. You can have poetry recitals, can have snooker clubs, etc. There is an entertainment function. There's also a cultural function. So a lot of art museums close at 6 p.m. So most of the time we are free. It's in the evening. If we go to the bar, we might as well go to a art museum with a bar, and you can have nighttime libraries where you can read. I even have described lovers even making love in the yards, and then the cleaning lady picks up all these the junk and stuff. So it's kind of imagining of the utopia as well for the hippies, for example. So I described Chu Yun, the Chinese artist, galaxies. So you have lots of like lights. If you have electronic device, always there's like a light coming out. So in the evening, we cannot see these man-made projects. We can always see these dots. So I like his this particular work, and I want all these art museums have to do with human beings, have to do with like fragments about darkness, that kind of thing.
Now I want to come back to Hiroshima Mon Amour, this amazing film of Alain Resnais based on a screenplay by Marguerite Duras, because you said you didn't really have a script for this film, but there was this inspiration through Hiroshima Mon Amour. And I was kind of thinking again, if you think about Hiroshima Mon Amour as a series of conversation, or we can see it as one enormous conversation of 36 hours between the French actress, Emmanuelle Riva, referred to as she, so that's also interesting that her character is she, which connects, of course, to your idea of la ville, the city in French being feminine, and then the Japanese architect, Eiji Okada, who is referred to as he. And in a way, the film has so much to do with memory and in a way forgetfulness, both memory and forgetfulness. And obviously your film happens in a very, very different moment of time, no? Because it's now a digital age, we have more and more information. But does that huge amount of information necessarily mean that we have more memory? Maybe not. Maybe, I'm always thinking that actually amnesia could very much be kind of very much at the core also of that digital age. And I think memory and forgetfulness have a lot to do with your work. And I was just curious if you can tell us a little bit more about Hiroshima Mon Amour and why this film, which somehow inspired you for this film of yours, which doesn't have a script.
So when I was doing Hiroshima Mon Amour, I used to like it. I like the films that I can repeat, seeing I can just stop halfway and then I can just put it on when it suddenly occurred to me. So Hiroshima Mon Amour is one of them. So there are novels that you really want to leaf through, and each reading is different. Gives you different imageries. So in the course of life, you only remember one or two books or films, which are always on your shelf. You can cherish from time to time. So for me, this vagueness and this particular the background of its of where it was set, and the whole nirvana process and their love seemed to have basically restored all the reality, but the reality weighs so heavily between the two of them. So when I was doing Latin, and then after I finished shooting, and I was like, does this film need some dialogue? And I thought about Hiroshima Mon Amour. I want some vague dialogues, not too many semantic mirrorings. What did you see, for example? I haven't seen anything. Why are you here? Why do we encounter such things? So there's not many contexts available. So these things probably can bring a certain alternative abstractness to the very concrete, despairing realities of Latin. So I invited two French people, one man, one woman, and they read out the scripts of Hiroshima Mon Amour. I kind of changed, what did you see in Hiroshima? I would transform into, what did you see in Latin? And then she will see, no, you will see nothing. I see children, I see destruction, etc., etc. And then the guy would say, no, you have seen nothing. You see like only virtual things. What you see is not real, etc., etc. So basically the voice is negating what the picture is affirming. So when you are in the... does the city exist at all? The post-apocalyptic destruction, is it exists in imagination only? Is it imagined future, or it's kind of a city that is balanced in our city? Although we live in a physical world, but when we look at Haze and Fog, there's another myth on another level, another dimension. The fear, city of fear, fear for the future, and in the context of fog, it's a kind of intangible, impalpable fear, what is lying underneath. So we can also use it as a metaphor for the kind of the unseen control, the unseen system that is running China so far. So as a Chinese artist living in China, the kind of context you're faced with, this kind of expression I choose. So for me, Hiroshima Mon Amour, it looks about love, amour, but I see what lies behind love, basically the war, the races, and love that cannot be approached, that kind of thing. So we don't know whether there was a good happy ending to the love relationship. Just like I used the last, in my Latin I used one of the quotes, it says, "You are in a dungeon, did you shriek?" And she said, "Yes, but I was dead already." So when they said this person was alive, and in response this person is dead. So it's kind of, it's about life, it's about death, it's about forgetfulness, it's about memory. It's all complicated, sort of intertwined. You cannot distinguish between reality and virtuality.
It is fascinating that these all happen on such a small space, because it's such a macro thing. And the idea of, macro leads us also to your most recent work, which we saw yesterday and which is going to continue, I think, for the next weeks here in Hong Kong, which is your actually gigantic public commission, same old, brand new. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this work and what triggered it and what were the sources for it. I don't know if you have images, but maybe we don't need images because you can all just see it. I mean, you have already seen it probably last night, and for those of you who haven't seen it, you can see it tonight again.
我接到那个 ICC 的委托。
So ICC commissioned me, together with Art Basel Hong Kong. The commission came around towards the end of last year. I was very happy that I could do a public project. It was the first one that I've basically done an outdoor public project. So you can see that in my previous works in RMB City and Haze and Fog, Beijing, and also Latin, I am always very interested in the urban, a major interest in that. So when my work is represents was basically is represented on top of a landmark building. So first, I would like to see how it fits into the context, cultural context, and popular culture of Hong Kong. So I chose the 80s game figure. So, the backbone of our society was born in the 50s, 60s, or towards the end of the 70s. And they basically were not new to the memories of the 80s. Hong Kong people were deeply in love with the gaming culture. So they looked down at their gaming device and they look up and then start to talk business. So I would like to be able to connect with the public in a language that connects with the public. So game culture becomes the symbol of my work. And also, this building is very high, very thin and long. So 16:9 or 4:3 screens are really different media already. So all these racing games, I'm just wondering if this building can become a sort of a track in a gaming particular game. So I changed a lot of ways the game is constructed. For example, the Pac-Man, I would just turn Pac-Man into a fish that eats human beings, and then they eat things that they fear. And also the Super Mario brothers, and they would change into a fist because they always hit the question marks with the fists, you know. Sometimes they get points, sometimes they get different kinds of rewards. So I have basically magnified the fists. And then they hit like a smiley. I think Hong Kong, there's a very sense of self-irony. There's a lot of, positive energy culture here, but there's also a sort of irony. Can laugh at themselves. So there's a lot of irony, laughing at themselves, but in this process, it's kind of you release the sort of nervousness under pressure. So in this gaming culture, I try to distill a language that is common to Hong Kong people. So that's basically how I thought about my own work, and it's a public work. So in the use of internet communities, a lot of people will take pictures and then make a video or a vlog, put it on all sorts of social networks like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc., etc. So I'm kind of respond to RMB City as a really existing city, and the internet responses it arouses. People look at it from different angles, from Shanwan, from Wanchai, from Central, from the sea, from top of the peak. They're basically mapping the entire same sort of panoptical view from different angles, perspectives. You can see the cities, the cityscape, for example, and the symbols you use in the work can be shared and transmitted by people. So the online community has now marched towards sort of a media common, where there's a discussion space among the public. So for it's kind of a further development for past urban projects.
Now you've taken us today through an extraordinary journey connected to the city and technology, which is obviously one major focus one can make in your work. There are many, many more dimensions to your practice, but we thought that for today, given also this new work, that could be the most relevant one. And that obviously leaves me with one very last question in relation to technology, is kind of your own use of social media and how you connect to Instagram and WeChat. This morning we posted a post-it for my project on Instagram and Twitter, where I basically protest against the disappearance of handwriting. So we post handwriting every day. And you wrote two questions, actually. you scan me, or I scan you, and that's connected to language and, of course, to WeChat. So I wanted to ask you about these two questions, to maybe explain them to us, and also how you use yourself, Instagram and WeChat, and if by any means, it had an impact on your practice.
So, piracy and public, for example, in social media, these are issues that have been under discussion. There's public life, there's private life. So in the past, in the age of the internet, this sort of interface is completely different. So we see a lot of people, we shake our hands, and then we just add each other's WeChats or Facebook. What is your account? What is your QR, the code? Because we're going to scan it. You scan me, or I scan you. So it has changed. It's already kind of replaced this kind of exchanges like how are you, etc. So now it has been compressed into this QR code, and you can scan each strangers, which is very interesting. Do I have to add this person, or do I put it in the blacklist, or do I want him to see my private life? Because if you go to the place like a nail bar, can we just add each other on a WeChat? If you go to the hair salon, strangers will ask you on WeChat, and then they can actually, they don't know about you. They're completely not familiar with you. But after scanning your QR code, he or she can see your entire life, from not knowing who you are to knowing everything about your life. So you know everything. So sometimes you're flying with an aircraft, and you feel, this person maybe looks like a film star. So I just can't remember his person, and then I started to search this person, and then from the person I can search everything about this person. Just divorced, or had a sort of an affair, just shot a film, etc., etc. So this person was maybe 10 rows away from you, but it seems that his entire life is already exposed in front of your eyes. So we can choose to read, or we can choose to ignore. So this is the kind of interpersonal, fast consumption, consuming each other's life and information. So on the internet, we are also subject to consumption by other people.
Now, this could be a great conclusion. I do, however, have one last question, because as you know too well, because you've answered it several times before, there is this only recurrent question in all my interviews, which is a question about the unrealized project. I think it's incredibly urgent to create awareness for artists' unrealized projects. As Alighiero Boetti, the late Italian artist, always said, we know everything about unrealized projects of architects, and they very often get their utopias built by publishing their unrealized project, but we almost know nothing about artists' unrealized projects. And there are lots of categories of the unbuilt. There are projects which are too big to be realized. There are projects which are too small to be realized. The Brazilian artist Cildo Meireles wanted to exhibit a tiny little cube in an empty museum, and it took him 30 years to convince the museum to empty completely and just show that little cube. So that project was clearly, too small to be realized. There are projects which are too expensive to be realized. There are projects which are censored. Censorship continues to play an important role. And of course, as Doris Lessing, the late English novelist, always told me, one very important category of the unbuilt is, self-censorship, projects we might not dare to do. So within these myriad categories of the unbuilt, I thought it would be nice, knowing that you have many unrealized projects, that we conclude this morning session by you telling us about one of your favorite unrealized projects which you would like to see realized in the future.
可能在说这个作品之前
So before I talk about my work, because he talked about cultural censorship, so I can probably, as an Chinese artist, I can talk about this. In China, of course, the cultural censorship is extremely strict compared to China, compared to Hong Kong. Even we have a very narrow area to maneuver. So when we start to work on our stuff, and then we need to find a context to present stuff. So abstract works, for example, or objective works, for example. Apart from those, how do you fight with society and keep your own stance, and also can create your own artworks, including preserving your own attitude? So it's a very difficult situation. So for me, censorship. You always over-censor yourself because you never know where the boundary of fear lies. And there's another dimension to it. And when I was working on this Hong Kong project, and then I found another kind of project, there's also cultural censorship in this commercial society. For example, we talk about commercial, like copyright, for example. If you reference these games, then you really have to think about copyright issues. And also as a commercial building, certain things they don't want to be disclose certain information to the public. For example, what happens in China, what happens in Hong Kong, you cannot use symbols or also this positive energy or cannot have a message running contrary to this popular positive energy. But it's trying for the artist, but I don't see it as an obstacle that I cannot overcome. I don't have to compromise necessarily. I don't think it's compromise. Because in China, if you're an artist, you cannot really compromise. Compromise cannot really be used to disavow all the works of Chinese artists. So this attempt to find a way to communicate and maximize the possibility of the work of art to be represented, to be transformed in different languages, I think that's something Chinese artists that's a situation independent of censorship. So, unrealized projects, because Mr. Obrist, I've known him for quite a few years, and he always asks me this question. So I already answered quite a lot of times. So I would like to change the way I answer him. So the project is I want to bring up my child, and other projects that are more realistic. For example, I want to make I want to have a 90-minute film. I want to make a film that long because I like the British film, seasonal film. So every season for Black Mirror discusses like technology, culture, future of human beings, like memory, all these relationships, complicated relationships among these elements, parameters. So such a theme, and also with and the new book by Obrist, The Age of Earthquake, for example, has discussed a lot of under the internet age, how we change the way of our behavior. So how we examine our life under the internet age.
Thank you
so much, and thank you all for being here so early this morning. Thank you.